I want to show you how I sew on my epaulettes to this jacket. And I stiffen them with, I'm starting to use a plastic sheet that I bought that I cut to size. But you could use cardboard, not corrugated, but like something from like a cereal box, compressed cardboard, a couple layers if you wanted it to be a little stiffer. You could cut up plastic from things you have laying around. This is the container that the shoulder pads came in, and I could cut that. That'd be a lot easier to cut than this stuff. This requires a utility knife to cut that. Kind of a pain in the butt, but I like to reuse these boxes, so I'm not going to cut that one up. See, I use mine here. I've got my zipper stuff in it. But, so, I'm going to make an epaulette. Basically, it's just a tube of fabric that I've sewn a seam, and I like to put the seam right here in the middle on the back because I use that to line it up onto the shoulder seam here on my jacket. So, the first thing you need to do is cut your fabric to the correct size, and you want to make sure that your grain for this one, that it's going this direction, so that I have this is a bengaline fabric, I have the horizontal stuff going so that it's like this, and you see the horizontal going that way. That's the way I saw it in the research that I did. So, you use your ruler, and you want to measure. I use a 2-inch wide epaulette. That's how much I think the width is based on my research. So you want to use your ruler to measure. You want this to go all the way to your collar seam back here. Just extra length is fine. You can always cut it down. And you want it to go to about an inch past the shoulder seam, and then I'm going to add another inch on for my fold, or the seam allowance, so I have some extra room. So that makes this, if you could see, they're 11 inches. I made it 11 inches wide, and then long. And then the width you have here just depends on how wide you want to make your epaulette. You want to basically make it twice the width of the epaulette plus 2 of your seam allowances, because you're going to have, a seam on either side. So I'll show you here. I've cut this piece at like 1/8 of an inch less than 2 inches because I want the final product to look like 2 inches, so I kind of trimmed it down a little because the fabric will add. And so you can see that's like double that width plus my seam allowance, which is about 5/8 of an inch. So it'll depend on the thickness of whatever you're using to stiffen your epaulette, and the width you want it to be in general. If you're using something that is easier to cut, you could always just, if you sew your seam and it still doesn't fit nicely, you can just trim it down. But this is really hard to cut, so I wanted to make sure that my epaulette really did fit this. You go like this. So I sew my seam, and it definitely fits. So I'll go ahead and make the epaulette out of this piece so you can see. So you basically would fold it in half with whatever right sides of the fabric you'd want towards the middle. And this is the wrong side, but this fabric has no sides really to it. It looks the same on front and back. And then I'm going to sew my seam, and then I'll show you how to iron it to get it to look like this. So I've sewn my seam on my epaulette, and then I've pressed open the seam on one side, and then the next thing I need to do is turn it over and press open the seam on the other side. Now the seam is pressed open, and I need to turn the epaulette inside out. You always press open your seams. Makes it so that the fold of the fabric is right there on that seam line. Alright, turned inside out. Then I need to I want this seam basically to be in the middle line of the epaulette. You want to make sure those seam allowances are folded down. They're going their opposite directions so that the seam lies open. Okay, so that's about, that line's about in the middle, and then I'm going to iron it. Not totally perfect because I'm doing this one-handed, but there's your epaulette. And then these edges are going to be your outer edges. So the seam is in the middle, so you don't have two seams here on the outside, and you'd see the edge of the seam when you were sewing it. And it gives you a nice line here that we can use to match up when we're putting this epaulette on the shoulder seam here so that it's perfectly centered on that shoulder seam. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to pin my epaulette in place, and then we're going to hand sew down each side till we get to the end, and then we're going to put our our stiffener in to figure out the length that we need, and then we'll trim that down, and then we'll finish off by hand sewing, folding this in and hand sewing the edge. So I'm going to pin this in place and then show you how to hand sew it. Okay, so I have the epaulette pinned in place, and I've you want to make sure that it goes long enough so it goes past your seam line here for your collar. And I'll mention that I'm doing this before I put the collar on so that I'll have the epaulette fabric underneath, and when I sew the collar it'll be perfectly fine. But if you have a jacket that's already made and you just want to add this on, then all you'd have to do is just, you know, bend your fabric over and kind of put it up close to the collar seam. Like bend it like this, trim it down, and sew it on. So you can still apply this after you have a jacket, or if you want to replace the epaulettes that are on it, or if you don't have any epaulettes yet. So I hand sewed along this line, and then I have my thread from the hand sewing just laying. I didn't finish it off because it's just loose, because I want to I need to hand sew both these sides, and just to make sure that the epaulette stays in the right position, and that when I put the plastic in to stiffen it, if it moves it around or changes exactly where it is, then I have this loose here. And I threw my needle a special way. You might notice there's no needle on the end of this. I'm going to show you how I do that and why, but it allows me to just have this thread loose, and then I can rethread it and finish sewing that line. So here's my needle. I double up my thread so the length is double what I need, and then it's hard for me to get a macro, but basically I loop it at the end. So you can see that the loop is here at the end, and then I have the ends of the thread through my needle head. And you might need a larger needle head to do that, but that's what I do. And so it makes it so I don't need to tie a knot. All I have to do is take a little stitch. Let me see if I can get in here. Take a stitch where I want to start, and then all you have to do is put your needle through the loop at the end, and then that gives you a knot without a knot. So it's easy to start. And then if you're going along and you're sewing and you need to pull your needle out, you don't have it stuck on the thread, and it's removable because the ends here are loose. So, alright, I'm going to go ahead and sew this on, but basically you want to take longer stitches in the fold of the epaulette, and take a little stitch on the body of the jacket, and just do that all the way down. The longer stitch in the fold gives that more thread in the fold, gives it tension, so that fold stays nice and crisp and firm. And you just need a little stitch on the jacket so you don't have buckles. You basically don't want if you went in and out like this, you get like big buckles where your thread wasn't holding down the folded edge. So you want to have more of the thread on the folded edge to hold it down close to the garment. Alright, I'm going to go ahead and finish this. Next part you want to do is you want to put your, whatever you're using to stiffen the fabric against your epaulette and sort of draw in where it needs to curve around the collar seam up there and where it needs to end, and then trim that down. And again, that should be, I say, about an inch away from the seam of the sleeve to the shoulder, and then you want it to curve slightly. I couldn't really draw it with the pencil, but when I cut it, it'll curve a little bit at the top. So I've trimmed my piece. I didn't end up curving it because it's too hard to cut a curve on this stuff. It's thicker. But that's about the piece size. And then if you wanted to go ahead and make your other piece cut to the exact same size, that's a good idea, so you make sure that they're even on both sides. And so I'm going to insert this now and then fold over the edge and then use the stitching from either the front or the back line of stitching to go ahead and finish off the end. Okay, I've inserted my epaulette stiffening. I folded under the edge of the epaulette. I did trim off a little so it's not too bulky. And then basically I'm going to check to see if the line of the stitching is going where it needs to, if I need to back it up and redo that. But it looks, I might redo some part right here so it doesn't gap as much. But I'm going to pin this in place and then use either one of these strings to finish off sewing the epaulette to the edge of the sleeve, on the top of the sleeve. Okay, sometime later I decided it was a pretty good idea to put my collar on before I put this stiff piece of board in here, because that might not have been very fun trying to sew with that there. So that might be a pretty good tip for you to do. Put your collar on, make sure that's all done with before you add the stiffening. But you do, if you want it to have a nice finish to it, you do need to put the epaulette fabric on there and sew it down before you put on your collar. Then put your collar on and then you can finish up the end here. So here I've put my piece of plastic or whatever you're using to stiffen, and I've hand sewed up the edge here. And so that's what the final look is right there. That's how you do it. If you have any questions, please let me know. I hope this was helpful, and please subscribe to my YouTube channel, and I hope to be offering lots of tutorials and help and showing you the stuff that I make. And thanks again. Bye.